In this module, we are going to be looking at the simple storage service S3. Let's have a brief overview of what the S3 service is, or some key terminologies as far as S3 is concerned. S3 is one of the key storage services on AWS. So we have S3 as one of the key storage services on AWS cloud. So as far as you hear storage on AWS, the first service that should come to mind is S3, and it is simple storage service. As far as the simple storage service S3 is concerned, one of the key things or one of the key terminologies we should understand is objects. Now, S3 is an object-based storage service, object-based storage service on AWS. So for you to store data as objects on AWS, you make use of the S3 service. Now, you might be wondering, what are these objects? An S3 object or S3 objects could be video files, audio files, text or document files, and a whole lot. So for you to store all these files, video files, audio files, text files, and document files, you store them as objects on the AWS cloud. Now, these objects don't sit independently. For you to store these objects in the AWS cloud, you put these objects in what we call buckets. So we say S3 is an object-based storage, and all these objects are stored in buckets. Remember, I mentioned as far as objects are concerned, we have video files, we have audio, we have text, and other file types. So all these constitute the various contents that are called objects. And now these objects are organized in what we call buckets. Now, if you get to the AWS cloud, you always see S3 buckets, and these S3 buckets generally have different objects in them. So you might have an S3 bucket containing object 1, object 2, object 3, object 4, and so on. And all these objects have different file types, maybe video files, audio files, and text files. And you store all these objects as buckets on the AWS cloud. Now, once you get to your AWS console, or once you get to the AWS console, you see a lot around AWS S3 buckets. First, we are going to create and configure an S3 bucket. Secondly, we are going to upload objects to the bucket. Thirdly, we are going to view objects in the bucket, and then we'll delete objects in the bucket. And lastly, we are going to delete the bucket. So we are on the AWS console, and we are going to be looking at the AWS S3 service. You can search for the service here on services S3, and you'll see it, scalable storage in the cloud. So you click on it, and it will take you to the AWS S3 console. As far as AWS S3 service is concerned, one of the key things you should note is the AWS service is actually a global service. You can create a bucket anywhere in S3, and you don't necessarily need to have that bucket stored in a particular region. So your buckets can be in any region. Your buckets can be accessed from any region, but when creating, you will definitely specify a region through which you want to have that particular bucket. Now, these are the key features of the Amazon S3 service. You have buckets, access grants, access points, object lambda access points, multi-region access points, batch operations, IAM access analyzer, and other storage lanes and stuff. But the key thing which you should focus on in this module is the AWS S3 buckets. S3 bucket is one of the most widely used content as far as S3 is concerned. So for you to actually navigate through S3 buckets, these are other buckets that have been created, and then you see the name of the bucket, the region in which the bucket was created, the access option of the bucket, and then the creation date. So you can have this very basic information about buckets. To have more information about buckets, you can actually click on the bucket, assuming you're the one who created the bucket, and then once you click on this, it will give you access to the bucket. So let's actually create our own S3 bucket as per the hands-on, and then we'll be able to see how to navigate through the AWS S3 buckets. Now, the first thing is we click on create bucket. Once you click on create bucket, the AWS will ask you to specify the region name. Where do you want to create this bucket? Remember, buckets are global. You can access them from any region, but they must be stored in a particular region. So maybe you can have your bucket in Amazon, in the United States, US, East, or North Virginia, and so on. So S3 as at now has some regions which you can actually create a bucket in, and some regions which you cannot create buckets in. So for you to actually specify, we are in Oregon region, so I'll choose US West to the Oregon region. Now, bucket names must be unique. That is, no two buckets can have the same name on the AWS cloud. So when you're creating your S3 bucket, you must make sure that it has a very unique name. No two buckets on AWS can have the same bucket name. So we are going to give this one a bucket name, Wanda Bucket Test Purpose 1. So this is the name of our bucket, Wanda Bucket Test Purpose 1. Now, when you're creating a bucket, there's some basic configurations. Do you want to control, you want to control who has access to the bucket or not? And you do that through what we call ACLs, Access Control List. ACLs give you the possibility to control ownership of objects written to the bucket from the AWS account and use of access control list. So objects actually stored in your bucket can be managed using the access control list. Now, as far as access to your S3 bucket is concerned, you want to actually manage who has access to that bucket or not. And now you can block public access for a particular bucket, meaning that you can block public access to the buckets and objects granted through new access control list. You can block public access to the buckets and objects granted through any access control list. You can block public access to buckets and objects granted through new public. And then lastly, you can block objects and cross account you can block public and cross-account access to buckets and objects through any public or access point policies. So all these policies actually gives more permission to who can access the bucket which you are creating. Now, bucket versioning is another way through which you actually keep your bucket intact. So versioning is a means of keeping multiple variants of an object in the same bucket. That way, it means if you have different updates of the same object, you can have those updates in different versions. So once you're creating your object or once you're creating your bucket, you can enable versioning so that at any given time, a new version of that object will be stored. And now it says you can use versioning to preserve, retrieve, and restore every version of every object stored in your Amazon S3 bucket. Now you can also add a tag if you want to tag your bucket so that every time the bucket is or you want to easily search your bucket, you can use tags to actually easily find the bucket. So for you to actually tag this bucket, you can give it name and then you can give the value Wanda. I think we had the name above. Let me get the same name. Wanda Bucket Test Purpose 1. So you give a tag Wanda Bucket Test Purpose 1. That will be the tag. And then you can actually enable encryption of this bucket. Now, as far as AWS S3 encryption is concerned, you can have server-side encryption with Amazon S3 managed keys. You can have server-side encryption with AWS Key Management Service, the KMS, and then you can have the dual layer server side encryption with KMS. So that is basically if you have a if you want to actually encrypt the bucket so that every information that is stored in the bucket is encrypted. And lastly, you can have advanced settings where you can lock the content, preventing people from deleting. So the basic object lock is to prevent unwanted deletion of the objects. So once you set up all these configurations and you give the bucket name, you set up public access or object ownership, set up public access, you set up bucket versioning, you set up tags and default encryption, and then you set up object lock. You can go ahead to create the bucket. Now, if you have a name that has already been in use, this will indicate that you should change the bucket name because that bucket name is already in use. Now it says we have successfully created bucket Wanda public test bucket 1. So for you to view this bucket, you click on view details. As far as buckets are concerned, you store content in AWS S3 buckets with what we call objects. So for you to actually store any item in S3, you store them as objects, and objects are the fundamental entities stored in S3. So your video, they are categorized as objects, your files and all those. Now, as far as this S3 bucket is concerned, some of the properties, we saw these properties when we were setting the bucket up: bucket versioning, bucket tag, encryption and all of that. We also have bucket permissions, which you saw through public access, bucket policy, bucket ownership, access control list. All these are bucket level permissions. And then we also have metrics. Once you store data in your AWS bucket, you can see the total bucket size, total number of objects, and so on. So all of this gives you the possibility to manage or to view the bucket metrics over time. You can have a 1 day view, a 1 week view, in 2 weeks view, how the data has been stored in the bucket. Now, management. This is one of the most important things which you must note. We can have life cycle rules. Life cycle rules basically determine the class through which you want to store your objects. We have various object classes, and you should actually do your little bit of research around the object classes. We have the standard class, we have the intelligent tiering, we have the standard access, we have the infrequent access, and so on. So you have to know all those classes and how you can create a lifecycle rule for object storage. And then replication rules. Replication basically is if you have a bucket in one region and you want that same bucket to be replicated across or to another region, you can use what we call replication rules to easily replicate. And then inventory is also a possibility for you to create inventory configurations on the bucket to generate a flat file to list objects or to list your objects and the metadata. So if you actually want to view all the data which you stored, you can actually use that. You can actually view that using the inventory configurations. Now we've created the bucket. Let's go ahead and upload an object. For you to upload an object, you click on objects. After clicking on objects, the next thing which you need to do is click on upload. Once you click on upload, you see the various possibilities. You can upload, you can drag and drop the files or folders here. You can add the file individually or you can add the folder individually. Once you create the bucket, it shows you the destination where this bucket is or where this object is going to be stored. So let's add files. I'm going to add a file. Let me look for a file on my desktop. You can actually look for your own file on your desktop. Let me take an image. I take open. You can actually add folders and all of that will be content. Remember we said all those images, videos, audios are all stored in objects. So once you select your object, you see I've actually uploaded screenshot. This image, the type is an image, and then the size is 1.7 megabit. So once you select the object you want to upload, you click on upload. This will automatically upload this content to your bucket. And now this content that has been uploaded will be stored as an object. So it says destination bucket, this succeeded, is gradually uploading. You can see the upload stages, one file uploaded, and then you see how much data has been uploaded. 832 kilobit, 50%, 880 kilobit, 1 megabit, 65%. You can see status, screenshot, image, 1.7 megabit, status in progress. So it shows that the object which you have selected is being created and you can view it being uploading or being uploaded. So once you upload your object in the bucket, you now see they'll give you a status uploaded. Now you can close this. If you are to view the object that have been stored in the bucket, all you need to do is to come to the bucket and you see objects. So the first object we have here is the screenshot this, and for you to view that object, it gives you all the details: the STURI, we have the AWS ARN, the Amazon resource name, the entity and all of that. So for you to have all details about this particular object that's been updated, you click on the object and you will see all of this. Now once you store the object, you can enable bucket versioning automatically once an object is being stored in the bucket. Remember, versioning gives you the possibility to start different versions of your objects. And then if you want to configure storage class, now it is in the standard storage class. You can go to AWS documentation and you read a little bit about other storage classes. We have the infrequent access, we have the frequent access, we have the deep glacier, and so on. So if I want to edit the storage class where the data will be stored, or the class in which this object is stored, I can just click on edit. Once you click on edit, they give you the various possibilities. We have the standard class, we have the intelligent sharing. For the standard class for frequently accessed data, the intelligent sharing is for data without is for data with changing or unknown access patterns. The standard infrequently accessed data, the one zone infrequent access, the glacier instant retrieval, and the glacier flexible retrieval, the glacier deep archive, and the reduced redundancy. So these are the various storage classes. They are designed for various access patterns. And then we have the availability zones that this data can be found, the minimum duration that the data can be stored, and then we also have the minimum object size. You have the minimum object size. We have the monitor and auto tiering fees, and then we have the retrieval fees, how much you pay to get the data back once you stored in this particular storage class. So for you to change the storage class, all you need to do is to click on edit and you'll be able to change the storage class of this bucket. But we are not actually going to change the size, so we'll just save settings. Now this is, it shows fail to edit because we have not actually done any edit. So you can close this and go back to the object. So these are the various object parameters. You can enable server-side encryption. You can actually tag this object and you can change the metadata. If you actually want this object to be locked, you can lock this object. So once you upload your object, those are the various possibilities which you have. You can download the object, you can open the object, you can view other object categories. As we saw, you can actually rename the object and stuff. So this gives you the possibilities to view and to manage the objects. Assuming that you want to create a folder or you want to create a new upload, you can create folder and then you upload files in that folder in your S3 console. So let's create a folder. You give the folder name, let's say Wanda Files. Once you create a folder, it's just the same as you creating a folder on your desktop and storing files in it. Once you create a folder, Wanda Files, or you give the name, you click on create folder, and that will automatically create the folder. Now you see there's a difference. The first one we had here was a file, and the second one we have now is a folder. You can now store files in this folder. So let me open the Wanda folder, and once you open the Wanda folder, you can see that you can upload now, and you can upload a file or an object in this particular folder. So once you upload, let's click on upload again. Let's add files. Let's select a file, an image, and we open and we give it some time to upload. Once you select open, you take upload and you give it some time to upload. So once you go through that, you see that it is uploading 800 and this megabit, 60% depending on the file size, for 56%, 64% depending on the file size. So the bigger the file, the more time it will take for it to be uploaded. Once you've uploaded your file and then effectively uploaded, you can close. So now you see that this screenshot is under the Wanda files, and because it's under the Wanda files, you can access all these screenshots only when you come to the Wanda files folder. So once you come back to our bucket, the Wanda bucket test purpose, you now see that we have files that can be stored directly in the bucket, as well as you can create folders and then you store the files in the folders. So this gives us the possibility to create and upload content to our S3 bucket. Now, the next thing says delete objects in the bucket, or the next task says we should delete objects in the bucket. For you to delete objects or files in the bucket, all you need to do is to highlight the file which you want to delete. Let's start with the object so I can give you a little bit of insight. Once you click on object and you delete, you put permanently delete, copy, and you try to delete object, and you see Objects successfully deleted. Let's go back to bucket. Let's search for our Wanda bucket. So this is our Wanda test purpose bucket. Let's try to delete this bucket and see if there's going to be a possibility. So I take delete bucket and I put the bucket name. So you see, it is impossible for me to delete this bucket because there are items in the bucket. So that's another very important thing for you to take note of. For you to delete a bucket in S3, you must empty all the items found in the bucket. So for you to empty the items found in the bucket, you can easily click on empty bucket here, and then AWS will either list the objects which you have, or you can use the hard force method by just doing permanently delete. So we are going to copy this permanently delete and we paste here. You must maintain the same name, permanently delete, and then you click on empty. It's going to empty all the contents in the bucket. And once it empties all the content in the bucket, you can exit, and then you can proceed now. You can now proceed to delete the object or to delete the bucket, because every content in the object or in the bucket has, you can now proceed to delete the bucket because every content in the bucket has been deleted. So you copy that and you paste. So you now see successfully deleted bucket Wanda bucket test purpose 1. So this is a very basic overview of how you can manage S3 buckets by creating and configuring a bucket, uploading objects to the bucket, viewing objects in the bucket, deleting objects in the bucket, and then deleting the bucket. So we are going to move right away to the module task. We are going to start right away with the module task, and the very first task is for us to create an S3 bucket and enable versioning. So the first task is to create an S3 bucket and enable versioning. So for you to do that, once you're on the AWS console, you click on create bucket. Remember, bucket names are supposed to be unique, so still give the same name, Wanda bucket task 1. And then they say we should enable versioning. So while you're creating that, you go down to bucket versioning and then you select enable. So this is going to create an S3 bucket, Wanda bucket task 1, that has versioning enabled. So that's the very first task. So once you do that, you click on create bucket. So once you create the bucket, you can click on view details, and then you see Wanda bucket task 1 created. And then if you come to properties of this bucket, if you look at bucket versioning, you see it is enabled. So that's the first task. You've created an S3 bucket that has bucket versioning enabled. The second task is for us to configure lifecycle policy and create a role name transition. So we are going to come to management, where we are going to configure lifecycle policy for this bucket. So once you come to once you come to management, you see lifecycle rules, replication rules, you see inventory configuration. So we are going to start by creating the lifecycle rule. So for you to create lifecycle rule, you click on create lifecycle rule, and then you give the rule name transition. Now remember, the lifecycle enables you to move data from one tier to the other based on specific requirements. So once you click on transition, now there is no need for you to select any of these prefix. The most important thing is for you to look at the life cycle rule actions. Now you say choose the actions you want this role to perform per request fees apply. Now, do you want to move current versions of objects between storage classes? Do you want to move non-current versions of objects between storage classes? Do you want to expire current version of objects? Do you want to permanently delete non-current version of objects, and so on? So let's first start with move current versions of objects between storage classes. That's the basic life cycle rule. Now, once you select this, they are going to ask you which storage class do you want to transition to. So if you want to choose the storage class, standard infrequent access, intelligent tiering, one zone infrequent access, glacier, glacier flexible, deep glacier, is going to choose, that's actually is going to transition objects from the current class which it is to this class. So it says that choose transitions to move current versions of objects between storage class based on your use case scenario. So let's just take the basic one, intelligent tiering, where we don't know how the data access pattern is. And then we say that after every 2 days, or after a day, let's take one day, after a day, it should transition objects from the current standard class into the intelligent tiering class after one day. So once you select this, it gives you a review of the transition and expiration action. So the current version actions: day 0, objects uploaded; day 1, objects moved to intelligent tiering. So that is exactly what it means by transitioning. So if you actually have to change this, if you say you want it to move to deep glacier, or if you want it to move to, let's say, one zone infrequent access, and you say after one day, it will tell you that the current version is the current version actions is objects uploaded, and then objects move to one zone infrequent access after a day. So once you create a rule, or once you select this transition state, you now need to click on create rule. Okay, they tell you a minimum of 30 days is required before transitioning to one zone infrequent access. It gives you further days after object creation. So we can take back our intelligent tiering. So after a day, the data moves to intelligent tiering, and then you can click on create rule. Now, the prefix basically helps you to be able to sort out transitions based on a given or use case, right? So we can just take a basic prefix, we can give it wonder prefix, where every time you see wonder prefix, you understand that it is for this particular transition, or it's for this particular life cycle rule. And then if you want to add tags, you can actually click on tags, you give a name. So you want to maybe switch, or you want to actually tag the name of this role, you can give it the name wonder life life cycle rule, and then now you can go on to create the rule. So once you click on create the rule, you now see that it has given the name the transition rule, and then now current version, it will transition the current versions will transition to intelligent tiering after the 1 day period which is specified. And then you can actually see the actions. You can see other further actions here. If you were to click on, if you click on this, you can see further actions here. You can disable the rule, you can delete the rule, and you remember these rules are per bucket. You can actually edit the rule if you want to modify the settings, or you can view details about the rule and stuff. So that is basically you doing the second exercise, which is to create a life cycle configuration or life cycle policy. So let's get back to our bucket for the next task. The next task is for us to upload sample objects into the bucket. First, we are going to upload simple files, and then we are going to upload simple files, and then secondly, we are going to upload folders. So for us to upload a single file, you click on upload, you choose the file. You can add files from your desktop or from whatever storage device you have. So let's upload an image. You select the image, and then you select open. Now it's going to upload this image. They give you a little bit of details. So it's files and folders, the total size 1 megabit. Now the destination is actually a bucket which you've created. You can get destination details here about this bucket. Version is enabled, no encryption yet, object locked, not yet enabled. You can view other permissions and stuff. So once you configure this, all you need to do is to select upload, and once you click on upload, it's going to start uploading this image to the bucket. So if you see here, 31%, total items remaining this, estimated time in few seconds, transfer rate 65 kilobit per second. Now the object has been successfully uploaded. So if you go back, or if you close this and you come now to the bucket, you now see that the bucket has a new object. Now let's also try to create a folder and then upload contents, or let's also try to upload a folder to the bucket. So you click on upload as usual, you click on add folder. You can now look for a folder on your desktop. You take maybe any folder. Let's take this Kubernetes cluster, and then you upload. Now they ask, this will upload all files This is this. Only do this if you trust this site. So we trust the site, so we take upload. And now if you look at the total size, it gives you 291 megabit. Now for the purpose of this demo, we are going to use a folder that has a lower size, or you can actually come into the folder and look for files that have a lot of size, and you can remove all those files. So you come here, you see that we have certain files that have a lot of size or have a lot of space. You can remove some of those files, but if you don't want to remove them, you can allow it. Just choose any folder on your desktop, and then once you choose the folder, you click on upload, and then you give it some time to upload. So once it's uploading, you see every file it completes the upload, it will tell you this succeeded pending for the files that are still pending upload. And then for those that are in progress, it equally tells you that they're in progress. So you can see other files here that are being uploaded, other files that are in that folder that are being uploaded, and so on. So you check all the files. So you can actually cancel the upload if it's taking long. You cancel all the remaining 25 files. So if you come here, you close, you now see that the folder was created, and then it shows you the files that were uploaded. The other files were not actually uploaded. So once, because we canceled the upload for the other remaining files, once you come to the folder, you see all the individual files. Take, for example, the AWS CLI pod.yaml file. This is the file. They give you details, key, Kubernetes cluster. This is the S3 URI, the resource name and stuff, object URL. So this is us uploading a series of files that are in a folder. So we've been able to upload sample objects. So we have the first object, which is this folder, and the second object, which is this other file. So this gives us the possibility to create and upload objects into our S3 bucket. The next task, is for us to enable server-side encryption on this bucket using AWS KMS. So for us to do that, we can search the KMS service KMS. You search the KMS service on your AWS console, and then you can open that in a new tab. So I'll open this, open a new tab. I go to the new tab. Once I'm in the new tab, I can create a key. KMS simply is the key management service which you can use to manage encryption in your environment. So you can use KMS to manage encryption in your environment. So you click on create key. Now, for you to encrypt, there are two types of keys. You can actually have a symmetric key or an asymmetric key. So for you to create a KMS, you actually need to specify the key type, if you say symmetric key or an asymmetric key. And then you want to use this key for encryption and decryption, or do you want to use it to generate and verify maybe a mark? So we are going to allow this default settings. You take next. Now you give the name of the key. You can say Wanda KMS key, and then you can just copy the name and then use for the, or we can say key for S3 in the description, and then you can maybe add tags, name, value, Wanda KMS. Wanda KMS key, and then you take next. So you want to define key administrative permissions. Now, what are the administrators, or which IAM users can administer this key through the KMS API? So you basically want to specify the users that can administer this key using KMS. So we can take my current user, and you can also take any other user that you want to have access. And this means that the users also have the possibility to delete this key. So once you select that, you take next, and then you define key usage permissions. Select IAM users and roles that can use the key in cryptographic operations. So you see, select the same users that you want them, that they can use this key to perform cryptographic permissions. If there's an account that you also want to use, you can actually specify that account. Once you do that, you take next, and then you see you're able to review. So you have the key review key configurations. It's a symmetric key. the origin in AWS KMS, the key spec, give these are all default that we created, the region originality, the key usage. Once all of this is done, this is the key policy that is automatically generated for you once you select all those configurations. And then once that is done, you take finish. Now we have been able to create a key, Wanda KMS. This is the key. You can see a symmetric key that we are going to use for encryption. You can also view the key here. You see a lot about the key, the policy, the users that have access to this key and stuff. Now the task was for us to actually enable server-side encryption with KMS. So we come back to our S3 bucket. We close this. We come back to our S3 bucket. You can come to properties of the bucket. You now go down to default encryption. They want us to manage the security with Amazon KMS. So I take edit. Now they'll ask you the type. Do you want to manage your encryption with server-side encryption with Amazon S3 managed keys? Or do you want to use AWS Key Management Service KMS? Or do you want to use the dual layer key? So we are going to choose the server-side encryption KMS. Now they'll ask you to choose the key from your AWS keys. So we can choose from our AWS keys in this region. So if you select choose from your AWS keys, you need to do the drop down for the keys which you've created. If you look at the drop down, you will see the Wanda KMS key which you created. Once you see the key, you select the key, and then now using an S3 bucket key for this reduces encryption cost by lowering costs to this. If you want to, by default it is enabled, so you can change this configuration. So once you do all this configuration, you click on save, it means that this bucket will be encrypted using the AWS KMS key. So if you come now down to our bucket default encryption, you see now the encryption key ARN is this, and we are using server-side encryption with AWS KMS. So that does it for the next task. So the last task is for us to enable cross-region replication for this bucket. And for us to do cross-region replication for this, it basically means that every file you create in a particular region will be replicated, or any object you store in this bucket will be replicated in another bucket in another AWS region. That is what cross-region replication does. So for us to do this, you need to choose a destination bucket in a different region. Now we have this bucket created in the US West 2 region. So let's create a different bucket, Wanda bucket tax 2 in a different AWS region, and then we store the data and we set up cross-region replication for this bucket. So let's come to bucket. We create bucket. Remember, we are creating this bucket no longer in the US West 2 region, but we're creating in the US East 1 region. So we call this bucket Wanda test bucket 2. And once you create the Wanda test bucket 2, this bucket will be in the US East 1 region. You allow the same configurations. We enable bucket versioning, give the tags. Well, you can give the same tag as this, the name. So you copy the bucket name, and then you come to tags, you give the name, you paste the name in the tag, and then you can allow the default encryption and stuff, and then you create bucket. Now once you create bucket, if you come to our bucket, if you type Wanda, we now see we have tax 1. This bucket is in US West 2, and then we have tax 2, and this bucket is in US East 1. So let's go back to our initial bucket 1 and enable cross-region replication. That means that if you come here, you see the files that are in the bucket in US West 2 in our bucket 1. And then if you come to our bucket 2, you see that there's no file here. So let's demonstrate how cross-region replication works. So for us to enable cross-region replication, you come to Wanda bucket tax 1, and then you come to management. You set up a replication rule. Now, replication rule basically enables you to actually copy contents from one bucket in one region to another bucket in a different region. So let's call this Wanda replication rule. And for this, you show the status is enabled. So the source bucket is what bucket are you using to or what bucket are you copying data from. So for the source bucket, we already have a Wanda bucket tax one. Maybe you want to set up a prefix, any bucket with the name Wanda. Then now, what's the destination bucket? You can come here, you give the destination bucket name. And what was the destination bucket that we had? Wanda. So if you see Wanda test bucket, Wanda test bucket 2. So by default, it has already picked that we already have a bucket in US West, US East 1 called Wanda test bucket 2. You could also just browse here and then you find the bucket name. So if you just type Wanda, it will show you your two buckets. We have bucket 1, 2, want to replicate to this other region. So you choose this part. It's going to copy content from bucket 2 and send to it's going to copy content from bucket 1 in US West 2 and send them to objects in bucket 2 in US East 1. So once you set that up, if you don't have an IAM role, you can actually create a new role, a replication role, and this will create it automatically for you. And if you want to enable replication, you can stick it to enable replication using the KMS key which you already created. And then once that is set up, you can change the destination storage class if you want. It is actually in the standard storage class, but you can change it to intelligent tiering, or you can allow it without being changed. And then additional replication options. Do you want to replicate the time which the replication will take place, or do you want to do some other modification? We are going to allow these additional configurations and then we save. Once you save that, they'll tell you replicate existing objects. Now, you've created a replication rule, meaning that you want to copy content from one bucket to the other. One bucket already has content, the other bucket doesn't have content. After creating your replication rule, they suggest, do you want to replicate existing objects to the bucket? If you take yes, replicate existing objects, it means that all objects that are in bucket 1 will be copied to bucket 2. If there are no objects in bucket 1, this pop-up will not be. So that's actually how replication works. Now they say you can enable a one-time batch operation job from this replication configuration to replicate objects that already exist. So for us to test cross-region replication, we select yes, replicate existing objects, and then you take submit. So once you take submit, you see the job settings, it automatically creates a job for you, and then you save, or you give the name of settings. And then when you come here for all the tasks, if you want to actually do a completion report, you can choose it to put the completion result in a particular bucket. And let's choose the destination bucket for all the completion results. We choose the test bucket 2 for our completion reports, and then we allow it to create a new role for the permissions, and then you take save. Once you take save, it tells you successfully created job ID this. It takes time to prepare this, and it shows you status preparing, description, replicate, operation, replicate. Now they are showing that no objects have been replicated yet because the job is still preparing, and then total complete, total failed, and so on. So you can keep refreshing this until you see the preparation complete. So that is it for the basic tasks that we have as far as AWS is concerned.